Once upon a time, there was a poor servant girl. Her days were long and hard. She would rake the garden, dust the shelves, and wash all of the clothes for her and her two mean stepsisters. Her stepsisters would tease her relentlessly every day. One day, while she was sweeping out the fireplace, they taunted her with this rhyme: "Cinders, cinders, sweep, 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 in those rags in which you sleep. From this day your name will ever be Cinderella." Soon enough, her real name was forgotten. She just became Cinderella. She was so kind and sweet, despite how cruelly she was treated. She simply continued with her duties in the hope that one day, when she was older, she would escape and live a wonderful life of which she often dreamed. One day, there came a knock on the door. Cinderella opened it. In front of her stood a knight of the royal guard. He read a letter aloud. "It is my duty to announce," he said, formally, "that His Majesty the King sends forth an invitation to all the young ladies of this fine kingdom to attend the royal ball at the palace." Hearing this, the stepsisters ran to the door and pushed Cinderella aside. "Oh, goody!" they cried, slapping their hands together with delight. The knight continued, "The prince and the heir to the throne seeks a princess, and he would like to meet each lady of the kingdom in the hopes of finding true love. The palace doors will open at 8 p.m. tonight." The knight then continued on his journey to the next house. "Prepare the gowns!" the sister hollered. Cinderella nodded. "Of course, sisters." Now you have to know that Cinderella longed more than anything to go to this ball, but she daren't ask her awful stepfamily. She already knew the answer. She didn't want to hear it. She simply just busied herself for the following days with her chores, and of course, preparing her stepsisters' ball gowns. The evening of the royal ball arrived. A splendid horse-drawn carriage pulled up in front of the door, and the stepsisters, adorned in their painstakingly hand-stitched gowns, promptly climbed on board. Cinderella looked on with great sadness as the carriage set off down the drive towards the palace. She sighed deeply. "Ah, if only I had a single wish," she said to herself. "I would attend the royal ball and, just for one night, be spared my frightful chores." Suddenly, a fairy appeared in front of Cinderella, hovering like a hummingbird and clasping a wand. "And you shall," said the fairy. "Shall what?" Cinderella replied, looking confused. "You shall have your wish. I am your fairy godmother. How you have suffered in silence all these years! You are a kind soul, a mild and gracious lady. You shall go to the ball, and your wish, my dearest Cinderella, is my command." Cinderella beamed. "Oh my!" she exclaimed with glee. She finally stopped. A frown came on her face. "I'm not prepared, fairy godmother. My clothes, they are threadbare. My shoes are tattered. I cannot possibly attend the palace like this." "Worry not, Cinderella," said the fairy godmother with a smile. "For all I will need to grant your wish is a pumpkin, 3 mice, and 4 grasshoppers." First, Cinderella went to the garden and returned with a large ripe pumpkin. The fairy godmother tapped it once with her wand, and in an instant it transformed into this majestic golden carriage. Another swoosh of the wand, and this time a resplendent coachman appeared, and the mice that Cinderella found in the pantry were turned into 2 smartly attired footmen. the 4 grasshoppers into 4 magnificent white horses. "And now," Fairy Godmother said, "for my final touch." She tapped Cinderella's shoulder with her wand. The raggedy clothes in which she stood for a moment earlier were replaced with a picture of sublime elegance. Cinderella in a magical sparkling ball gown, fit for a princess. And upon her feet the finest pair of shimmering glass shoes that your eyes could behold. "Sensational!" exclaimed the Fairy Godmother. "But remember," she said shortly, "as the clock strikes midnight, this spell will be broken, and your clothes will return to rags." "I understand," said Cinderella, kissing her Fairy Godmother on the cheek, "and 1,000 thank yous for your wonderful kindness." Cinderella stepped into the carriage, and then with a single swish of the coachman's reins, the horse-drawn golden carriage departed for the royal ball. The trumpets sounded as the golden carriage drew up to the palace gates. Cinderella received a royal welcome. Many heads turned as she entered the ballroom, including that of the prince, who was immediately struck by Cinderella's elegance and the warmth of her smile. The prince approached her. "My lady," he said, bowing his head, slowly offering his hand, "would you be so kind as to take my first dance?" "I would be delighted," said Cinderella. She could feel her cheeks beginning to blush as she accompanied the prince to the dance floor. The orchestra began to play. Every eye on the ballroom was upon them, including those of her 2 stepsisters. But much was her transformation, they simply did not recognize her. Instead, they glared in envy, longing to take her place before the prince. But they never will, and they never did. From that moment forth, the prince had only eyes for Cinderella. The 2 of them spent their whole evening dancing in each other's arms and greatly enjoying each other's company. Many hours drifted by. Cinderella suddenly looked up at the clock. Oh my gosh! It was 11:59. She only had 1 minute until the magic spell was broken. "Oh, I must go!" she said to the prince. Without delay, she darted out the room, past the guards and through the palace. But as she reached the hall, she lost one of her glass slippers, and in her haste to get away, she left it behind. A few days passed. Cinderella returned to her daily chores. Her stepsisters continued their relentless beastliness towards her. Everything was back to normal. The evening of the royal ball began to blur and fade in Cinderella's mind. It was like a magical dream. Suddenly, there came a rap upon the door. Cinderella opened it. In front of her stood the same knight that announced the royal ball. "I present," he said triumphantly, "the Majesty, His Majesty, the Prince." A trumpet sounded, and the armoured knights parted to reveal the prince, holding a sparkling glass slipper, the very same slipper that had escaped Cinderella's foot as she fled the palace. Cinderella's eyes widened. She locked eyes with the prince and held his gaze for a moment. Not for long, but for long enough time for him to know that this was the lady on which he had danced with that magical night. All of a sudden, there came the heavy stomping of feet. The stepsisters came rushing to the door, barging Cinderella aside so hard she almost lost her footing. His Majesty is visiting every home in the land to find the rightful owner of this glass slipper. The foot that belongs in this shoe is the lady that he will ask to marry. The sisters will yelp with excitement. Now at this point, the prince already knew that the sisters' feet would not fit into this shoe, but he hadn't got the heart to tell them, So, for the following 10 minutes, a quite ridiculous charade took place as the sisters, in turn, tried on the slipper. The first sister's foot was so wide that it barely managed halfway in, and to avoid the slipper shattering under the pressure, the little man was forced to intervene. The second sister had more luck. She eventually managed to compress her foot into the slipper, only for the sides of her foot to spill over the edges like a river bursting its banks. Then came the turn of Cinderella. The sisters scoffed in unison. The mere thought of Cinderella in her threadbare rags trying on such an elegant shoe. The prince stepped forward with a knowing look in his eyes. He knelt down, carefully slid the glass slipper onto Cinderella's foot. The prince smiled. "A perfect fit," he said. Without a moment's hesitation, Cinderella reached into the pocket of her servant's dress. Then, bending down slowly, she matched the pacing slipper on her other foot. A matching pair. There's no doubt that you, Cinderella, are my one true love. I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Would you be doing me the grand honor of becoming my wife? Cinderella looked upon her rags and looked back at the prince. "I am but a poor servant," she said. "You are," replied the prince, "but a princess in my eyes. It matters not to me of the clothes upon your back, for we share something more valuable than gold of 1,000 kingdoms." He looked longingly into Cinderella's eyes and said, "We share love." And I'm pleased to say that Cinderella gladly accepted the prince's proposal, and shortly after they were married. Before long they ruled as king and queen, and dedicated their lives to the happiness and prosperity of people in their wonderful kingdom. And they all lived happily ever after. The end.